You know, to make Jamaica a safer place, you'd have to live and love and respect each and every individual like how you'd love yourself. Let's create a safer Jamaica.
A message from the Ministry of National Security.
When you feel like giving.
Wait, hold on. Colin, hey, what go on? You know, say, I'm on my way to go look about the farm work program. Aye, I love to do the farm work program there, you know. But remember, I serve a 5-year prison sentence for a minor crime. Them can't clear it, you know.
Yes, Colin can get his record expunged. Expungement is having a conviction removed from your criminal record after certain specifications have been met. Visit the Criminal and Civil Justice Division in the Ministry of Justice for more information.
My name is Romelda Akins, and I represent the Jamaica National Netball team. I'm hardworking, disciplined, and dedicated. I don't need dope to cope, neither should you.
A message from the Jamaica Anti-Doping Commission and the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture.
A little section about a woman on Park Avenue who sees her son go off to Vietnam. They could hardly find uniforms small enough at the shoulders or long enough at the legs for him. He stepped onto the plane, trousers at half-mast. I should have known then. I should have just called him back. But on he went. The plane took off and it went small against the sky. A barracks was already built out in Tan Son Nhut. At the Air Force Base, a small brass band was there to meet them. Cinder block and desks of pressure-treated wood, a room full of PDP-10s and Honeywells. They walked inside, and the place, it hummed for them. A candy store, he said. And she wanted to tell him so much on the day he left. The world is run by brutal men, and the surest proof is their armies. And if they ask you to stand still, you should dance. If they ask you to burn the flag, wave it. If they ask you to murder, recreate. Theorem, anti-theorem, corollary, anti-corollary. Underline it twice. It's all there in the numbers. Listen to your mother. Listen to me, Joshua. Look me in the eyes. I have something to tell you. But he stood, buzz-haired and red-cheeked in front of her, and she said nothing. Say something to him, that shine to his cheeks. Say something. Tell him. But she just smiled. Solomon pressed the Star of David into his hands and turned away and said, "Be brave, son." She kissed his forehead goodbye. She noticed the way the back of his uniform creased and uncreased in perfect symmetry. And she just knew, the moment she saw him go, that she was seeing him go forever. Hello, Central, give me heaven. I think my Joshua is there. So, how is it being dead, son? And would I like it? Thank you. Okay, for this part, I have to take off my hat. Look, I write a lot about other people. I spend most of my life writing about other people because I wake up in the morning and don't want to be myself. And I also believe in the value of otherness. I believe in leaping. I think some of the value of literature is being able to be alive in a body and a time that's not your own. It's not just about the writer, but it's also about the reader too. When you read these books, you become someone else. And the great value that we have in the world is that value of empathy, that value of decency, where we can stretch into others. But this is, a part where I joke with my wife, Alison, who's here in the front row, second row here, said, this is the only semi-autobiographical part of my fiction. And it's in the voice of a 38-year-old hooker from the Bronx. Now, but you'll see why it's the only semi-autobiographical in the second sentence. So I can't do a Bronx accent, unfortunately, but so I got a trick I thought I recognized. He was youngish, but bald on top. The bald spot was very white, like a little ice rink on top of his head. So he got a room in the Waldorf Astoria. The first thing he did was he pulled the curtains tight and he fell on the bed and he said, "Let's get it on." I was like, "Wow, do I know you, honey?" He looked at me hard and he said, "No." "Are you sure?" I said, all cutesy and You look familiar. No, he said, real angry. Hey, take a chill pill, honey, I said. I'm only axing. So I pulled off his belt and I unzipped him and he moaned, oh yeah, 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 like they all do. And he closed his eyes and he kept on moaning. And then, I don't know why, but I figured it out. It was the guy from the weather report on CBS. Except he wasn't wearing his toupee. That was his disguise. So I finished him off and I got myself dressed and I waved goodbye, but I turned at the door and said, hey man, it's cloudy in the east with the wind at 10 knots and a chance of snow. Yeah, she's rude, but she's fun. This is a voice of her granddaughter many years later, where she has a photograph of Philippe Petit walking across the World Trade Center towers many, many years later after 9/11, 2006. The chapter's called Roaring Seaward and I Go, from a Tennyson poem. She often wonders what it is holds that man so high in the air, what sort of ontological glue. Up there in his haunted silhouette, a dark thing against the sky, a small stick figure in the vast expanse. The plane on the horizon, the tiny thread of rope between the edges of the buildings, the bar in his hands, the great spread of space. The photo was taken on the same day her mother died. It was one of the reasons she was attracted to it in the first place, the sheer fact that such beauty had occurred at the same time. She'd found it, yellowing and torn, in a garage sale in San Francisco 4 years ago, at the bottom of a box of photographs. The world delivers its surprises. She bought it, she got it framed, she kept it with her as she went from hotel to hotel. A man high in the air while a plane disappears, it seems, into the edge of the building. One small scrap of history meeting a larger one, as if the walking man were somehow anticipating what could come later. The intrusion of time and history, the collision point of stories. We wait for the explosion, but it never occurs. The plane passes, the tightrope walker gets to the end of the wire, things don't fall apart, and it strikes her as an enduring moment, the man alone against scale, still capable of myth in the face of all other evidence. Thank you.
Changes to the Earth's climate are due in great part to the actions of man. This has unleashed climatic extremes, which has left the world's weather in turmoil. Sea level rise, coupled with a 3-degree rise in temperature in some places, have resulted in threats to various species, heat waves, intense and more frequent forest fires, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, drought, and food shortages. Eventually, cities will be destroyed. Islands will disappear due to an invading sea. Join PBCJ Sundays at noon with a repeat Wednesday mornings at 8 for lessons on climate change and what we can do to combat it. That's Lessons on Climate Change, Sundays at noon with a repeat broadcast Wednesday mornings at 8. PBCJ, for the truth on climate change.
Violence against women and girls is a human problem, not just a woman's problem. It's a problem for men too. Gender violence takes many forms, including sexual assault, domestic violence, relationship abuse, sexual harassment, and sexual abuse of children. The magnitude of ongoing violence against women and children in our country is cause for alarm. We can end the violence. It requires all of us to end the violence. I call on all our men and women in Jamaica to take a stand. And men, especially, must get involved in this movement to create a better world for their daughters, their mothers, their sisters, their aunts, their uncles, their fathers, their sons, and for themselves. Let's protect and reassure. Let's unite to end gender violence.
$500 pumpkin ripe and ready to reap for market. They must pay for school fee, light bill, water, and put food on the table. Even though to make cow them kill. Oh God. Them steal my sweat, my labor. Them steal my future.
Predial larceny will not be tolerated anymore. You're going down hard. There are big cash rewards. Crime Stop. Solving crime pays.
Hi, I'm Neveline Williams-Mills, Jamaica 400 champion, and you're watching PBCJ People's Station.
You know, I was thinking about being here and what I could say. I had to say globalicious and all sorts of like words that I had to repeat. But I remembered when I was a kid growing up in Dublin, and this is a really, really bad joke. I bet you everybody in Jamaica has actually heard it 1 billion times over, and you're going to groan. But my mother was a great baker, and she would bake stuff during the week, except on a Friday she wouldn't bake things. We were a Catholic family. We'd have fish on a Friday, and she wouldn't bake anything. So my dad would go down to the local Dunnes Stores, which was a supermarket there, and he would buy Jamaica gingerbread, right? And so he'd put it on the table, and inevitably either myself or one of my brothers and sisters would turn towards my mum and say, "Did you make it yourself?" You've heard that one before, right? No? Okay, it's a new one. All right, good.
Hi, I'm Kai Millen. We're speaking to some writers again who've been reading here at the Calabash Festival. We're speaking to the amazing Irish novelist Colm McCann.
I have a complex relationship. I have a transatlantic relationship. I live in New York, but my family's from Dublin. So I wrote this book called Transatlantic. I'm only going to read to you from one section. Again, like the last book, it's got multitudinous voices and stuff like this. But I only want to read from one particular voice. It was the voice that inspired me to do this, and I wanted to read it today for several reasons. But I was amazed to find out that in 1845, a 27-year-old black slave went from Boston and went to Liverpool first, and then arrived in Dublin in 1845. He was still a slave, but he was a free. He had escaped. He was an escaped slave. He was what they would have called a runaway at that stage. His name was, and I bet you guys all know him, Frederick Douglass. The great Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist, the great statesman, one of the greatest figures in American politics, who was inspired everybody all the way up to Martin Luther King and Obama, and will inspire us beyond. But the thing is, he had already written narrative of the life of a slave, and he was going to Ireland on a lecture tour. And so he's there, and everybody sort of like was amazed to see a black man there, but he was staying with the wealthy Irish who were there. And I wanted to try and capture that, because what happened at that time is that he ran into, well, everything that was going on at that time. But Rab last night read this wonderful poem about the Irish famine. Well, what Frederick Douglass ran into was the Irish famine at that time. I'm going to read you a couple of pieces to try and communicate what it was like, or to try and understand what it might have been like to have been a 27-year-old in Ireland for the first time. And he said that when he was in Ireland, he felt free. He said, "I am under the emerald skies, and lo, the chattel becomes a man." At the bottom of his traveling trunk, he kept 2 iron barbells, made for him by a blacksmith in New Hampshire, an abolitionist, a friend, a white man. Each of the barbells weighed 12.5 pounds. The blacksmith told him he had melted them from slave chains that had once been used in auction houses where men, women, and children had been sold. The blacksmith had gone around and bought all the chains, melted them, made artifacts from them, in order, he said, not to forget. Douglass kept the barbells a secret. Only Anna knew. She lowered her eyes to the floor when she had first seen them, but she soon grew used to them. First thing every morning, last thing at night, there was a part of him that still missed the days of carpentry and caulking, fatigue, desire, hunger. He turned the key in the bedroom door. He pulled the curtains across. He locked out the light of the Dublin gas lamps. He lit a candle and he stood in his shirt sleeves. He lifted the barbells one after another, first from the floor and then high in the air until sweat dripped down onto the wood. He positioned himself to watch in the oval looking glass. He would not become soft. It was exhaustion he wanted. It helped him write. He needed each of his words to appreciate the weight that they bore. He felt he was lifting them and letting them drop to the end of his fingers, dragging his muscle to work, carving his mind open with idea. He was in the fever of work. He wanted them to know what it might mean to be branded, for another man's initials to be burned into your skin, to be yoked around the neck, to wear an iron bit at the mouth, to cross the water in a fever ship, to wake in another man's field, to hear the jangle of the marketplace, to feel the lash of the cowhide, to have your ears cropped, to accept, to bend, to disappear. It was his work to capture that through the nib of his pen. His billowy white shirt was covered in ink stains. At times, searching for words, he would hold the blotting paper to his forehead. Later, dressing himself for dinner, cravat, smoking jacket, cufflinks, polished shoes, he would glance in the mirror and find blue spots of ink smudged on his face. He was told by Webb that the Irish words for a black man were far gurum, a blue man. He scrubbed his face, his hands, his fingernails. He looked at himself again in the mirror, and he lashed out, stopped short, his knuckles trembling at the glass. Last little piece, just to give you a sense of this man, Douglas, and what it was that he had to confront. And I mean, I have tremendous admiration for him, but he did not speak out on behalf of the poor Irish at the time, and it was something I had to figure out in my own head. And it's all about the contradictions that we must hold with one another. This is just a little bit about Irish politics, and then we'll hand you over to Zadie. The politics still confounded Douglas. Who was Irish? Who was British? Who was Catholic? Who was Protestant? Who owned the land? Whose child stood rheumy-eyed with hunger? Whose house was burned to the ground? Whose soil belonged to whom and why? The simple way to see it was that the British were Protestant, the Irish were Catholic. One ruled, the other lay underfoot. But where did Webb fit in, and where did Isabel fit in? He would gladly have allowed himself to align with the desires of freedom and justice, but it was to his own known cause that he had to remain entirely loyal. 3 million slaves. He could not speak out against those who had brought him here to Ireland as a visitor. There was only so much he could take upon himself. He had to look to what mattered. What was beyond toleration was the ownership of man and woman. The Irish were poor, but not enslaved. He had come to hack away at the ropes that held American slavery in place. Sometimes it withered him just to keep his mind steady. He was aware that the essence of proper intelligence was the embrace of contradiction, and the recognition of complexity was to be balanced against the need for simplicity. He was still a slave. He was fugitive. If he returned to Boston, he could be kidnapped at any time, taken south, strapped to a tree, whipped. His owners, they would make a spectacle of his fame. They had tried to silence him for many years already, but no longer. He had been given a chance to speak out against what held him in chains, and he would continue to do so until the links lay in pieces at his feet. And he thought he knew now what had brought him here. The chance to explore what it felt to be free and to be captive at the same time. It was not something even the most aggrieved Irishman could understand, to be in bondage to everything, even the idea of one's own peace. His body